Sure. Below is part 1 of your story, written in simple, natural English, human-centered, emotional, and fully compliant with YouTube's content policies. It's crafted to sound heartfelt and real, keeping readers or listeners engaged throughout. You can copy and paste it into a document easily. The wind was biting cold that evening, cutting through the air like tiny blades. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, painting everything white. In a small, run-down car parked on the edge of a lonely country road, a little girl sat quietly in the back seat. Her name was Emily Carter Uraz, and she was only 7 years old. She pressed her hands against the fogged-up window, tracing little shapes with her fingers as she watched the snow drift down. Her aunt, Marjorie, sat in the front seat, tapping her fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. The car heater barely worked, and her breath came out in clouds. She glanced back at Emily every now and then, her face tight and unreadable. "Put your hat on," Marjorie said sharply. "It's cold." Emily nodded and pulled the wool hat over her head. It was one of the last things her mother had knitted for her before the accident. A soft blue hat with tiny white stars on it. She held onto it whenever she missed her parents, which was always. They had been driving for a long time, longer than Emily could remember. She wasn't sure where they were going. Her aunt had told her they were taking a short trip to visit someone, but the further they went, the fewer houses she saw. The road was empty, silent except for the crunch of snow under the tires. Emily looked up from the window. "Auntie, are we almost there?" she asked softly. Marjorie didn't answer at first. She kept her eyes on the road. "Almost," she muttered finally. The little girl smiled faintly. "Will they have a dog?" "I like dogs." Her aunt sighed heavily. "No, Emily, they don't have a dog. Now stop talking and sit still." Emily pressed her lips together and looked down. Her small hands gripped the edge of her seat. She could tell her aunt didn't want to talk. She never really did. Since the day Emily had come to live with her, things had been quiet and tense. Marjorie wasn't mean all the time. She fed her, gave her clothes, made sure she went to school, but she never smiled, never hugged her, and never said goodnight. It wasn't like when her parents were alive. Emily missed her mother's laugh, her father's warm hugs, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. It had been only 3 months since the accident, but it felt like forever. Now everything was cold. Even home didn't feel like home. After a while, the car slowed down and stopped. Emily looked out the window again. They were on a narrow road surrounded by tall trees covered in snow. There were no houses, no lights, nothing. Only white fields and silence. "Stay here," Marjorie said, turning off the engine. Emily blinked. "Why?" "I need to make a phone call." "I'll be right back." Her aunt stepped out of the car, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed in the empty night. Emily sat there, shivering a little. The car grew colder quickly without the engine running. She rubbed her hands together, blowing on them to stay warm. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. She couldn't see her aunt anywhere. Finally, Emily opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit her face like a slap. The snow came up to her ankles. She wrapped her small arms around herself and looked around. "Auntie?" she called. Her voice sounded tiny in the wide, quiet world. "Where are you?" There was no answer, only the wind. She walked a few steps forward, leaving small footprints in the snow. The trees loomed like dark shadows. The only sound was the soft crunch under her boots. Then in the distance, she saw the car lights flash once, and then the sound of the engine starting. Emily froze. "Auntie?" she cried again, her voice shaking. The car began to move, slowly at first, then faster. She ran after it, her boots slipping in the snow. Wait for me," she screamed. But the taillights grew smaller and smaller, until they disappeared completely into the night. The little girl stopped running. Her chest hurt from breathing the icy air. Her cheeks were wet, though she couldn't tell if it was from the snow or her tears. She fell to her knees, the cold seeping through her clothes. The world was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. For a long moment, Emily just sat there. Her mind couldn't make sense of what had happened. Maybe her aunt was coming back. Maybe she just went to get gas. Maybe she got lost. She hugged her backpack close. Inside were only a few things: a small teddy bear, a book, and a sandwich wrapped in foil. Her aunt had packed it for her earlier that evening without saying much. Emily tried to stand up again. Her legs felt weak, but she pushed forward. "I'll wait," she whispered. "She'll come back." The snow kept falling, covering her footprints, the road, and everything around her. The wind grew stronger, howling between the trees. After what felt like forever, Emily realized the car wasn't coming back. Her lips trembled. "Mommy, like Daddy?" she whispered. She didn't know which way to go. Every direction looked the same. White, endless, empty. The cold bit into her skin. She could feel it even through her coat. She began to walk, hoping to find a house, a light, someone. But the more she walked, the more lost she felt. The road curved and disappeared behind the trees. Her little boots filled with snow. The night was so dark that she could barely see her own hands. She stopped under a tree for a moment to rest. Her fingers were numb. She tried to remember what her mother used to say whenever she was scared. "Be brave, Emily, even when things are hard, even when you're alone." She closed her eyes and tried to believe that. Minutes turned into hours. Her body grew heavy and tired. Her breathing slowed. She thought she heard her mother's voice calling her name, soft and kind. But when she opened her eyes, there was no one. Only snowflakes swirling in the wind. She sat down again, too exhausted to keep walking. The snow gathered on her shoulders and hat. She looked up at the sky, the stars faint behind the clouds. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a sound. "Someone help me." Her eyes fluttered. The world around her blurred and faded. Somewhere far away, there was the faint sound of a car engine. A different one this time. A set of headlights cut through the snow, moving slowly down the road. But Emily didn't see them. She had already fallen over onto her side, her small hands curled against her chest. The car stopped just a few yards away. The door opened and a man stepped out, pulling his scarf tight against the cold. He could barely see anything in the storm. But then his flashlight caught something. A small shape in the snow, motionless and still. He hurried toward it, his heart pounding. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees. The child was so pale, her lips blue, her eyelashes dusted with ice. "Oh, dear God," he murmured, quickly wrapping his coat around her tiny body. Emily stirred faintly, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the wind. "Mama?" "No, sweetheart," the man whispered, lifting her gently into his arms. "You're safe now. I've got you." He ran back to his car, the snow whipping against his face, and placed her on the back seat, turning the heat up full blast. He drove off fast, heading toward the nearest town, praying she would hold on just a little longer. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the lonely road where she had been left. But for the first time that night, there was a glimmer of hope, faint but real, shining through the storm. "Would you like me to generate this as a Word.docs or in a PDF file for download? I can format it cleanly, with spacing and readability for storytelling or voiceover use. Of course, here's Part 2 of your story, written in a warm, natural, human tone that flows smoothly from Part 1. It's emotional, vivid, and YouTube safe, with no violent or graphic content. The writing style stays simple, like a spoken story or short film narration. When Emily opened her eyes again, everything looked blurry. She could hear a soft beeping sound somewhere nearby and feel warmth all around her. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The last thing she remembered was snow, wind, and a man's voice telling her she was safe. She blinked slowly and saw a white ceiling above her. There was a small light glowing near her bed, and she could hear footsteps outside the room. She turned her head and saw a kind-looking woman standing near the window wearing a blue uniform. "Oh, sweetheart," the woman said with a smile when she noticed Emily was awake. "You're finally up." Emily tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. The woman poured a little water into a cup and helped her take a small sip. "You're in the hospital, darling," she said softly. "You were found out in the snow, but you're safe now. You're going to be just fine." Emily's voice came out weak. "Where's my aunt?" The nurse's smile faded for a moment. "We're still trying to find her, sweetheart. But don't worry about that right now. You just rest." The little girl looked around the room again. There were flowers on the side table and a small blanket tucked neatly over her legs. She noticed a coat hanging on the chair nearby, a big one made of dark wool. It didn't look like something that belonged to a nurse. The nurse followed her gaze and smiled again. "That belongs to the man who brought you here. He's been sitting with you most of the night. He just stepped out to get some coffee. He'll be happy to see you awake." Emily looked down at her hands, still small and pale against the white sheets. She remembered flashes from the night before, headlights, a voice, strong arms lifting her. She couldn't remember his face clearly, but she remembered feeling safe, even if just for a moment. The nurse tucked the blanket around her again. "I'll let him know you're awake." A few minutes later, the door opened. A tall man stepped inside, brushing snow off his shoulders. His eyes looked tired, but when he saw Emily sitting up, a wave of relief washed over his face. "Hey there," he said gently, walking closer. "You gave us quite a scare." Emily stared at him quietly. He didn't look scary at all. His coat still smelled faintly of the cold air outside. He pulled up the chair and sat beside her bed. "I'm glad you're okay," he said. "You've been asleep for almost 2 days." Emily's eyes widened. 2 days? He nodded. "You were very cold when I found you. But you were brave. You held on." She studied his face. He looked kind, but there was something sad in his eyes too. The kind of sadness you see in people who have lost something they loved. "Thank you," she whispered. The man smiled faintly. "No need to thank me. I just happened to be driving by." He paused, then said quietly, "I'm Nicholas." "Emily," she said softly. "Nice to meet you, Emily," he said, his tone light and gentle. "I think the nurses like you already. They keep saying you're the toughest little girl they've seen this winter." Emily gave a small smile. "I don't feel tough." Nicholas chuckled quietly. "Well, maybe that's what makes you brave." There was a moment of silence as he looked around the room, then back at her. "Do you remember what happened before I found you?" Emily looked down, fiddling with the edge of her blanket. "My aunt. She said we were going to visit someone. But then she stopped the car and told me to wait. She never came back." Nicholas's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded slowly. "That must have been very scary." Emily nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I thought she was coming back. I waited and waited." Nicholas leaned forward a little. "You didn't do anything wrong, Emily. None of this is your fault." She sniffled quietly. "Did I do something bad? Maybe she didn't want me anymore." He felt his chest ache at those words. He had heard them before and from himself many years ago. He took a deep breath. "Sometimes people make choices that don't make sense. But that doesn't mean you're not wanted." The little girl looked up at him, her eyes big and tired. "You mean that?" He smiled gently. "I do." Over the next few days, Nicholas visited every morning. He brought books, crayons, and even a small snow globe that lit up when she shook it. Emily began to smile more, her cheeks turning pink again. The hospital staff adored her. She told them stories about her parents, how her dad used to lift her up to reach the stars, and how her mom always made pancakes shaped like hearts. Every time she talked about them, her voice softened and everyone listened quietly. Nicholas would sit by her side, listening too. He didn't talk much about himself, but the nurses knew who he was. A wealthy man known for his quiet generosity, someone who gave money to hospitals and children's homes but never liked to be in the spotlight. He lived alone in a big house outside the city, where the snow covered the gardens like white velvet in winter. One afternoon, a woman from social services came to speak with Emily. She asked her gentle questions about her aunt, about where she lived, about what happened that night. Emily tried to answer as best she could, though her voice shook. Afterward, the woman spoke quietly with Nicholas in the hallway. Emily watched through the window as they talked. The woman looked serious. Nicholas nodded a few times, his expression calm but thoughtful. When he came back inside, Emily was sitting up, hugging her teddy bear tightly. "Are they going to send me somewhere?" she asked. Nicholas hesitated. "They just want to make sure you're safe, Emily. They'll find a good place for you, maybe with a nice family." She looked down again. "I don't want another family. I want to go home." He sat on the edge of her bed. "Where's home now, sweetheart?" She thought for a long time. "I don't know." He reached out and gently brushed a bit of hair from her face. "You'll find it again. I promise." That night, as Emily slept, Nicholas stood by the window watching the snow fall outside. He couldn't shake the image of her tiny figure lying in the snow when he'd found her. It haunted him in a way he couldn't explain. He remembered his own childhood. Cold nights in foster homes, the feeling of being unwanted, the silence of being forgotten. Maybe that was why he had stopped that night. Maybe something inside him knew exactly what it felt like to be left behind. Over the next week, Nicholas spent more time at the hospital than at his office. His assistant tried to remind him about meetings, calls, and plans, but he didn't care. There was something about Emily, her quiet courage, her soft smile, that made him want to stay. One morning when he arrived, Emily was sitting up in bed coloring a picture. When she saw him, her face lit up. "I made this for you," she said, handing him the paper. It was a drawing of two people, a tall man and a small girl holding hands under a big yellow sun. He smiled and studied it carefully. "Is this us?" She nodded proudly. "That's you and me. And that's the snow. But it's not cold anymore." He felt a lump rise in his throat. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you," she grinned. "You can keep it forever." "I will," he promised. Later that day, when Emily was asleep, the social worker returned with more news. The police had found her aunt. They were making arrangements for a court hearing. The woman explained that until everything was settled, Emily would stay in temporary foster care. Nicholas nodded politely, but inside, his heart sank. The idea of her being sent off to strangers didn't sit right with him. After the woman left, he stood by Emily's bed again. She was sleeping peacefully, her small hand curled around the teddy bear. He whispered quietly, "You've been through enough, little one. You deserve better." He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just walk away. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was beginning to clear, and the first rays of morning sunlight peeked through the window, falling softly on Emily's face. Nicholas stayed there for a long time, watching her breathe, feeling something stir deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Would you like me to generate this part as a word? Docs. Fauscan, so it's ready for download and use in your YouTube script or story series. I can also format it to match Part 1's layout perfectly. Of course, here's Part 3 of your story, written in simple, human-centered, natural English. It continues the tone and rhythm of the first two parts, keeping it emotional, safe, and deeply engaging for a YouTube audience. Nicholas had never been the kind of man who spent much time around children. His world was filled with meetings, deadlines, business calls, and long, quiet dinners in an empty house. But after meeting Emily, something had started to change inside him. The silence that used to feel comfortable now felt empty, and for the first time in years he found himself looking forward to each new morning, because it meant seeing her again. It had been almost 2 weeks since he found her in the snow. The hospital staff said she was recovering well. Her cheeks were pink again, her hands warm, and her laughter had returned in small bursts. But there was still a sadness in her eyes that appeared when she thought no one was watching. Nicholas noticed it every time. One morning, when he arrived at the hospital, he found her sitting by the window watching the snow outside. She looked up as soon as he walked in. "You're late," she said, crossing her arms playfully. He smiled. "Traffic was bad. Too many people trying to beat the snow," she giggled. "Maybe they're just scared of it." "Maybe," he said, taking a seat beside her. "But not you, right?" Emily shook her head proudly. "Not anymore. I used to hate snow because it made me cold and lonely. But now I think it's pretty." Nicholas nodded, his heart warming at her words. "You're right. Snow can be beautiful when you're not alone in it." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "You're not alone in it either now." He chuckled softly. "I guess I'm not." They spent the rest of the morning reading a storybook together. Emily loved fairy tales, especially ones where people found kindness in unexpected places. When they reached the end of one story, she said quietly, "I like stories where people get found." Nicholas looked at her. "Me too." That afternoon, a nurse came in and told Nicholas that the doctors would discharge Emily soon. She was healthy enough to leave. Social services had arranged for her to go to a temporary foster home, while the court handled the case against her aunt. Nicholas felt his chest tighten. He knew this day was coming, but hearing it out loud made his stomach twist. He looked at Emily, who was drawing on a piece of paper. She didn't seem to have heard. Later, when the nurse left, he sat down beside her again. "Emily," he began gently, "the doctors say you're all better now. That means you can leave the hospital soon." She looked up at him, smiling. "Really?" "Yes, really. Isn't that good news?" Her smile faded slowly. "Where will I go?" He hesitated. The people from social services have a nice family for you. They'll take care of you for a while. Emily stared at him, her little hands still on her drawing. But you won't be there? Nicholas shook his head softly. No, sweetheart. But I'll make sure you're safe. Tears filled her eyes. I don't want to go without you. Nicholas reached for her hand. I know I don't want you to feel scared. You're the bravest little girl I've ever met, remember? She looked down, trying not to cry. But I don't want to be brave anymore. He squeezed her hand gently. You won't have to be forever. I promise. When he left that evening, he sat in his car for a long time, staring at the falling snow. He couldn't shake the feeling that sending her away was wrong. She had already lost everything, her parents, her home, even her sense of safety. To send her to strangers now felt cruel. The next morning, he called the social worker and asked if he could visit the foster home once Emily was placed there. The woman hesitated at first, saying it wasn't common for rescuers to stay involved, but Nicholas was persistent. She has no one else, he said firmly. At least let her know someone still cares. After some discussion, the social worker agreed. 2 days later, Nicholas stood outside a small white house at the edge of town. The snow was melting now, turning to soft slush under his shoes. A woman opened the door and smiled politely. You must be Mr. Grant, please come in. Inside, the house smelled like fresh bread and coffee. There were family pictures on the walls and toys scattered on the floor. Emily was sitting on the couch hugging her teddy bear. When she saw Nicholas, her face lit up. You came, she said, running to him. He knelt down and opened his arms. Of course I did. I told you I would. The foster mother smiled kindly. She's been talking about you every day. Says you're her hero. Nicholas felt his throat tighten. I don't know about that, he said quietly. He sat with Emily for a while, talking and laughing. But when it was time to leave, she clung to his sleeve. Will you come back again? He looked into her hopeful eyes. If you want me to, she nodded quickly. I want you to. Then I will. That night, back at his house, Nicholas couldn't stop thinking about her. His home felt colder than ever. Big rooms filled with silence, empty hallways that echoed his footsteps. He walked into his study and saw the drawing Emily had given him pinned on his desk. The two figures holding hands under the sun. He stared at it for a long time. He thought about how she smiled when she saw him, how her small hand fit perfectly in his. Something deep inside him told him she wasn't just another child in need. She was meant to be in his life. A few days later, he met with the social worker again. He told her he wanted to apply to be Emily's guardian. She looked surprised. Mr. Grant, she said carefully, that's a big responsibility. Are you sure? I'm sure, he said. I don't make decisions like this lightly, but I can give her stability. A real home, she nodded slowly. You understand that the process takes time? Background checks, home visits, interviews. I understand, he said. Do whatever you have to do. For the next few weeks, Nicholas's life changed completely. Instead of focusing on business meetings, he spent his days preparing his house for Emily. He set up a small bedroom next to his own. Soft pink walls, bookshelves, a small desk, and a bed with a thick blanket. On the pillow, he placed a stuffed bunny. When the social worker came for her visit, she smiled as she walked through the house. You've really thought this through, she said. I've had a lot of time to think, he replied. In between the paperwork and interviews, Nicholas still visited Emily every few days. Each time she seemed happier. She showed him drawings, told him about her new school, and laughed more easily. But she always asked the same question before he left. When can I come home with you? He would smile softly and say, Soon, Emily, I promise. Finally, one bright afternoon, he received a call. The voice on the other end was the social worker. Mr. Grant, she said warmly, it's official. You've been approved. You can take Emily home. For a moment, Nicholas couldn't speak. His eyes watered as he whispered, Thank you. That evening, he drove to the foster home. Emily was sitting by the window again, waiting. When she saw his car pull up, she ran to the door before anyone could stop her. He stepped inside and she threw her arms around him. You came back. He hugged her tightly. I told you I would. Does this mean, she asked, looking up at him hopefully. Yes, he said softly. You're coming home. Tears of joy filled her eyes. Home, she whispered as if testing the word. He smiled. Home. On the drive back, Emily watched the world through the car window. The snow was melting and the first signs of spring peeked through. Green grass, small buds on trees, and sunlight spilling across the fields. When they reached Nicholas's house, she gasped. "It's so big." He chuckled. "Well, it's too quiet for just one person. I think it's better with two." She laughed and ran up the steps, turning back to wait for him. Inside, she explored every corner. The living room with the big fireplace, the kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon, and finally her room. She froze when she saw it. The soft pink walls, the books, the little bed waiting for her. "Is this for me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all for you," Nicholas said. "Welcome home, Emily." She ran to the bed and hugged the stuffed bunny tightly. "It's perfect," she said with a big smile. "I love it." That night, as Nicholas stood by the doorway watching her fall asleep, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. She looked so small and safe under the blanket, her teddy bear beside her. He whispered quietly, "You're not alone anymore." Outside, the snow was almost gone. The world was turning new again, and in that quiet house, filled with warmth and laughter for the first time in a long while, both Emily and Nicholas found something they didn't know they were missing. Family. Would you like me to create my scene? Part 4. Next. Same style, around 1,500 words. Or would you prefer I make this part into a .docs document first so you can download it? Of course, and here's your part 4 of your story, written in a heartfelt, simple, and human-centered tone. It continues naturally from part 3, keeping it warm, emotional, and engaging for your audience, with no content that violates YouTube policy. The first few weeks in her new home felt like a dream for Emily. Every morning, she woke up to sunlight streaming through the window of her pink room. The air smelled like pancakes or hot chocolate, and she could hear soft music playing from the kitchen downstairs. For the first time in a long while, she didn't wake up afraid. Nicholas had kept his promise. He had made the house feel alive again. He no longer left early for meetings or stayed out late at work. Instead, he spent his mornings helping Emily get ready for school, and his evenings listening to her stories about her day. He learned that she loved to draw, that she was shy around new people, and that she had a laugh that could brighten even the coldest day. She learned that he didn't like loud parties, that he worked with computers, and that he made the best grilled cheese sandwiches in the world. They were still getting used to each other, but every day brought them closer. One Saturday morning, Emily sat at the kitchen table with crayons spread out in front of her. Nicholas was making breakfast. "Can I draw you?" she asked suddenly. He looked over his shoulder and smiled. "You want to draw me? That could be dangerous," she giggled. "You sit still too long anyway." He laughed, setting the spatula down. "Fair point." She studied him seriously for a while as he cooked, her little tongue sticking out slightly as she focused on the paper. When she finally finished, she handed him the drawing. It showed him standing by the stove with a big smile, and next to him was a smaller version of herself holding a pancake. Above them, she had written in uneven letters, "My family." Nicholas stared at it for a moment. The words hit him harder than he expected. His eyes softened, and he crouched down beside her. "That's the best picture anyone's ever made of me," he said quietly. She smiled proudly. "It's because it's real." He didn't know what to say. He reached out and gently touched her hair. "You're something special, you know that?" She nodded confidently. "You are too." They both laughed, and the sound filled the whole kitchen with warmth. That afternoon, Nicholas took her to the park. The air was crisp and the snow had almost disappeared. Children were running around, playing with kites and balls. Emily ran ahead, her coat flapping behind her. "Wait up," Nicholas called, laughing as he chased her. She turned and grinned. "You're too slow." "I'm old," he said, pretending to stumble. "Have mercy." Emily laughed so hard she nearly fell over. They played until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When she finally got tired, she sat on a bench beside him, resting her head against his arm. "It's pretty," she said softly. "It is," he replied. But he wasn't looking at the sky. He was looking at her, the little girl who had somehow changed everything. That night after she went to bed, Nicholas sat in his study, staring at the same drawing she'd made that morning. My family. He had built a company worth millions, but nothing had ever felt as valuable as those two words. Over the next few months, life settled into a rhythm. Emily went to school, made new friends, and started smiling more. The teachers said she was quiet but kind, always helping others, always polite. Nicholas attended her school play, cheered at her soccer game, and even helped her with her homework, though he often joked that her math was harder than his business meetings. Every Friday became their movie night. They'd build a fort from blankets, make popcorn, and watch something funny. Emily loved it. Sometimes, though, she still had nightmares. She would wake up crying, calling for her mother, or shivering from memories she couldn't shake. Whenever that happened, Nicholas would come into her room, sit by her bed, and hold her hand until she fell asleep again. He never said much, just stayed close so she'd know she wasn't alone. One night, after she'd had another bad dream, she whispered, "Why did my aunt leave me there?" Nicholas sighed softly. "I don't know, Emily. Some people make choices that hurt others. It doesn't mean you deserved it." She looked at him with watery eyes. "Did you ever feel alone like that?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I did. A long time ago. But then someone came into my life and made me feel like I belonged again, just like you did for me." Her eyes widened. "I did that for you?" He smiled. "You did." She thought about it for a moment, then said, "Then we both saved each other." Nicholas couldn't hold back his smile. "Yes, sweetheart. We did." From that night on, the nightmares came less often. A few weeks later, Nicholas received a call from the social worker. She told him that the court had made everything official. Emily's adoption papers were complete. She was now legally his daughter. When he told Emily, she froze for a moment as if trying to understand what he'd just said. "You mean, really, forever?" she asked. He nodded. "Forever?" Tears filled her eyes as she threw her arms around him. "I have a dad now." He hugged her tightly, his throat too tight to speak. The next day they celebrated with ice cream and balloons. Nicholas even took her shopping for a new dress, though she ended up picking a simple one, blue with tiny white stars. "Like my hat," she said, smiling. That evening they went to the same park where they had played before. This time Emily carried a small bag of breadcrumbs to feed the ducks. The sunset reflected off the pond, turning everything golden. Nicholas sat on the bench watching her laugh as the ducks quacked around her feet. For a moment he thought about how different his life had become. Before Emily, his days had been quiet and predictable. Meetings, numbers, success. But now his world was filled with noise, laughter, and small hands tugging at his sleeve. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. As they walked home, Emily slipped her hand into his. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course," he said. "I used to think no one would ever find me," she said softly. "That night in the snow I thought I was going to disappear." He squeezed her hand. "But you didn't." She looked up at him with a small smile. "No, because you came." He stopped walking for a moment, looking down at her. "I think maybe we both found what we were missing that night." She tilted her head. "What were you missing?" He smiled gently. A reason to smile again, she giggled. "You smile all the time now." "That's because I have you," he said. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. Together they built a life filled with small routines. Morning breakfast chats, walks to the park, storybooks before bed. Nicholas's house, once so empty, now echoed with laughter and the sound of a child's footsteps running down the hall. Every evening, they would sit by the fireplace and Emily would tell him about her dreams. Sometimes they were silly, like owning a candy shop or living in a castle, and sometimes they were serious, like helping other children who didn't have homes. Nicholas listened to all of them. "You can do anything you set your heart to," he'd tell her. She'd grin. "As long as you're there too." "I'll always be here," he'd say. And he meant it. One Sunday, Nicholas took her to a small community center he'd been working on secretly. When they arrived, she saw a big sign being put up on the front. It read, "The Hope Foundation, for children who need a second chance." She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "What is this?" he smiled. "It's a place to help children like you, ones who just need someone to find them." Her eyes filled with tears. "You made this because of me?" He nodded. "Because of us," she hugged him tightly. "Can I help?" He laughed softly. "You already have." That night when they got home, Emily placed a new drawing on his desk. This one showed the two of them standing in front of the building, surrounded by smiling children. At the top, in bright colors, she wrote, Where Hope Lives. Nicholas looked at it for a long time, his heart full. Later, when Emily was asleep, he walked into her room and watched her breathing softly under her blanket. He brushed a stray hair from her face and whispered, "Thank you for finding me, little one." Outside, the snow began to fall again, softly this time, gently covering the world in white. But this snow wasn't cold or lonely anymore. It was peaceful. It was home. Would you like me to make this into a .docs file, formatted and ready to use for your YouTube story narration? I can match it with parts 1-3 for a consistent style. Of course, here's Kombam, part 5 of your story, written in a soft, emotional, and human-centered style. This part gently wraps up Emily and Nicholas's journey with warmth, hope, and heart. The tone remains simple and natural, perfect for a YouTube audience. Years passed quietly, like the slow turning of pages in a book that no one wanted to end. The house that had once been silent was now filled with laughter, stories, and the sound of a young girl growing up. Emily was no longer the small, frightened child Nicholas had found in the snow that night. She was taller now, her hair longer, her smile brighter. But even as she grew, there was still a trace of the little girl who had once clung to his coat, trembling and cold, yet full of quiet courage. Nicholas watched her grow with a mixture of pride and wonder. He still remembered the first day she had called him Dad, and how his heart had nearly stopped. Now she said it so naturally, as if it had always been that way. Life between them was peaceful but never dull. Emily had started helping out at the Hope Foundation after school. She played with the younger children, read them stories, and told them that sometimes the people who find you are meant to be your real family. Nicholas would watch her sometimes through the big glass windows of the community center. She had a way of making everyone around her smile. The same light that had saved her now shined on others. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Nicholas stood outside waiting for her. She came running out, waving a paper in her hand. "Dad," she called, breathless. "I got in." "In where?" he asked, smiling. "The art scholarship. The one for the City Academy." Nicholas blinked in surprise. "You mean the one you said was impossible?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "They said my drawings made them feel something real. They want me to start in the fall." He pulled her into a hug, laughing. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." She held on to him tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "No, Emily. You did this because you believed in yourself." But deep down, he knew that she had given him just as much as he had given her. That evening, they sat by the fireplace like they always did. The flames flickered softly, and outside the first signs of winter were returning. Emily looked thoughtful. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked quietly. Nicholas nodded slowly. "Every now and then." "I used to be scared to remember it," she said. "But now when I think about it, I don't feel sad anymore. Because if that night hadn't happened, I wouldn't have found you." He reached for her hand. "Life can be strange like that. Sometimes the hardest moments lead us to the best ones." She smiled faintly. "I think maybe it was supposed to happen. Like it was part of a bigger plan." He looked at her with gentle eyes. "Maybe so." The fire crackled softly between them. A few weeks later, winter came again, white snow covering the streets just like the night they first met. But this time, the snow didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful, almost magical. On Christmas Eve, the Hope Foundation held a small celebration. Children from all around the area came, some with foster parents, some still waiting for families of their own. The big room was filled with laughter, lights, and the smell of hot cocoa. Emily helped decorate the tree, placing the star at the very top. Nicholas watched her from across the room, his heart full. Later that night, after the children had gone home, Emily and Nicholas stayed behind to clean up. She found a box tucked away in the corner, old photographs and letters from families who had adopted children through the foundation. She sat on the floor reading them one by one. "This is amazing," she whispered. "All these kids found homes." Nicholas smiled softly. "That's what this place was built for. Because of you." She looked up at him. "Because of us," she corrected gently. He chuckled. "Right, because of us." When they finished, they walked outside. The snow was falling again, soft and slow. The streetlights made it sparkle like tiny stars. Emily wrapped her scarf tighter. "It's beautiful." It is, Nicholas agreed. They stood there for a moment in silence. Then Emily turned to him and said, "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" He smiled. "Every single day." She laughed lightly. "You know, sometimes the kids at school can't believe my story. They say it sounds like a movie." Nicholas grinned. "Well, not many people get rescued by a billionaire in a snowstorm." She nudged him playfully. "You weren't just a billionaire. You were my miracle." He looked at her with soft eyes. "And you were mine." They began walking home, the snow crunching softly beneath their feet. The world around them felt quiet and safe, like it was holding its breath for them. When they reached their house, Emily stopped and looked up at it. The windows glowed warmly from inside. "It still feels like magic, doesn't it?" she said. He nodded. "It does, and it always will." Years later, Emily's art would be displayed in galleries across the country. People would stop in front of her paintings and feel something deep, something honest. She often painted small children in snowy landscapes, but there was always a warm light in her work, a sign of hope breaking through the cold, and in every interview, when people asked her what inspired her, she would smile and tell the same story. "I was found in the snow once, but someone saw me, someone believed in me, and that changed everything." Nicholas was there at every exhibition, standing quietly in the back watching her shine. He never liked attention, but seeing her succeed filled him with a pride he couldn't describe. One night after one of her shows, they went out to dinner together. The restaurant was quiet and a soft snow was falling outside. "You know," she said as they finished their meal, "I think I finally understand something." "What's that?" he asked. "That people can be broken," she said softly, "but love can fix them. Not all at once, but little by little." Nicholas nodded. "That's true." She looked at him with warmth in her eyes. "You fixed me." He smiled gently. "You fixed me too." When they left the restaurant, they walked slowly down the street. Snowflakes landed on Emily's hair and she laughed, spinning around like she used to when she was little. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" she called out. Nicholas laughed. "Of course I do. You were this tiny bundle of blankets and bravery. And you," she teased, "looked like someone who didn't know what to do with a little girl." He chuckled. "You're not wrong." They both laughed, and the sound carried softly through the cold air. Eventually, they stopped on a bridge overlooking the frozen river. The city lights shimmered on the ice below. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily said quietly, "If I could go back and talk to that little girl, the one who was left in the snow, I'd tell her not to be afraid. I'd tell her that help is coming, that someone kind will find her, and that one day she'll be happy again." Nicholas looked at her, his eyes misty. "That's a beautiful thing to say," she smiled. "It's true." He put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there watching the snow fall, peaceful, gentle, endless. Time went on, and their story became something people whispered about, not because of wealth or fame, but because it reminded others that kindness still existed, that sometimes a single act of compassion could change a life forever. And every winter, on the anniversary of the night they met, Nicholas and Emily would return to that same quiet road where everything began. They would stand there for a moment, side by side, remembering. Emily would always bring a single white rose and place it in the snow. Then she'd whisper, "Thank you." Nicholas would smile and say, "For what?" "For stopping that night," she'd reply. "For saving me." He'd look at her with that same warmth in his eyes and say, "No, Emily, you saved me too." Then they would walk back home together, the snow falling softly behind them, leaving two sets of footprints side by side, a reminder of how two lost souls had found each other and built a family out of hope. And that was the truest part of their story, that love can begin in the coldest places and still grow warm enough to last a lifetime. Would you like me to create this? Part 5. In a neatly formatted docs file with clean spacing, ready for narration or upload. I can prepare all 5 parts together for you in one polished document if you'd like.